Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Shorts episode number 16. Ernest James Montague. In 1936, Ernest Montague was described in the newspapers as a callous bigamist who had 4 aliases: Ernest James Kendrick, Graeme Monte Winston Chisholm, Kenneth, Raymond, Kelsey, and John Montague. Ernest Montague was also known as Jack and was born in Parnell, New Zealand on the 13th of February 1900, even though he stated that he was born on the 13th of February 1894 in his New South Wales jail record, and he also said he was born in 1891 in his Victorian jail record. He was the son of James Frederick Montague and Sarah Sissons Wells, who were both born in New Zealand. Ernest claimed in one of his bigamy trials that his correct name was Chisholm. Montague was one of his Christian names. He said he first married in a marriage of convenience to Zillia Gelch at Idaho Falls in the US in 1920. He said he lived with his wife only for a few weeks, and he met her again in Sydney in 1922 and in 1928 when she told him that they had divorced in 1924. You will find in the bigamy court records that seemed to have been another one of his white lies that he told throughout his life. However, he did in fact marry Doris Gwendolyn Berry in 1922 in Sydney. Doris was 18 and Ernest 22. In New South Wales on the 11th of May 1923, he was charged with refusing to pay for meals and accommodation, and he received 1 month's jail in Bathurst Jail. On the 12th of May 1923, in the Bathurst National Advocate, at the Bathurst Police Court yesterday, Ernest James Montague, a motor driver, was sent to jail for 1 month for refusing to pay the sum of £29.05 for meals and accommodation at the Grand Hotel. A.V. Reid, proprietor, stated that the defendant stayed at the hotel from the 23rd of March to the 10th of May and did not pay 1 penny of board. The defendant was arrested yesterday morning, and there was no alternative but to send the defendant to jail. 4 years later, he featured in the New South Wales Police Gazette on a series of mugshots. Ernest James Montague, alias Kendrick, false pretender, obtains the confidence of business people and passes valueless cheques, dresses smartly, a native of New Zealand. And on the 2nd of May 1928, he features again in the New South Wales Police Gazette. Ernest James Montague, alias Kenneth, Raymond, Kelsey, 34, charged with the larceny as a bailee of a wireless set valued at £20, recovered, the property of Osborne Clark, has been arrested by Detective Sergeant Surridge and Constable Devine in Sydney, further charged with obtaining 3 wireless sets and money in each case valued at £44 and 4 shillings, the property of Claude Elvin Holmes by false pretences, committed for trial on 4 charges at the Quarter Sessions. On the 22nd of May 1928 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, it outlined one of those cases. Ernest James Montague, 34, salesman, was acquitted before Judge Callous yesterday on a charge of having stolen a radio set, the property of Osborne Clark, on the 1st of March. The judge ordered that £8 and 10 shillings found on Montague at the time of the arrest be returned to Clark. And on the 26th of May 1928, it outlines the court proceedings on the other charge in the Sydney Morning Herald. Ernest James Montague, 34, salesman, was charged with obtaining 2 wireless sets, the property of the radio company, by falsely pretending to Claude Elvin Holmes on the 5th of March at Sydney that he had sold one set to Charles James O'Brien, living in Annandale, and another to Charles Sidney Corkhill in Centennial Park. The Crown alleges that the accused had told Mr Holmes that he'd sold the sets to the people named and produced agreements. He drew his commission on the sales and was handed over the sets, which it was alleged he had pawned. It was then found that the people mentioned in the agreements did not exist. The person living in Park Road stated that a man calling himself Corkhill had engaged a room at her house and had paid £5 in advance, but that was the last she saw of him. The accused was convicted and sentenced to 2 years hard labour. His Honour said that if the 6 sets which the prisoner had obtained were returned, he would recommend a reduction of 1 year. In the case of one or more being returned, he would recommend a proportionate reduction. Ernest appealed the sentence on the 1st of June 1928, but it was dismissed on the 6th of July 1928. He served his time at the afforestation camp at Tuncurry. It also stated on this record that he had been previously convicted and that his sentence will expire on the 28th of June 1930. In June 1928, though, the Attorney-General had declined to proceed further against Ernest James Montague, alias Kenneth Raymond Kelsey, under committal charged with obtaining a wireless set, the property of Claude Elvin Holmes and Osborne Clark, by false pretences, which case was not proceeded with at the last sittings of the Sydney Sessions. He's living with his wife, Doris Gwendolen, at 12 Halivar Street in Chatswood, New South Wales in 1930, and he lists his occupation as a manufacturer agent. However, in the next year, he lived in Melbourne with a woman that was his lawful wife. But when he went to court, he denied having gone through a form of marriage at Paran on the 26th of June 1931 to Helen Appleby. A Helen Violet Appleby did in fact marry a John Montague in 1931 in Victoria. He was convicted in Victoria on the 11th of September 1931 on 3 counts of false pretences. And on the 11th of September 1931 in the Melbourne Herald, broker's cheques. John Montague, broker of a Wrong Road, East St Kilda, pled guilty in the St Kilda court today to 3 charges of having imposed on tradesmen. Rutland Forsyth, a grocer of Inkerman Street, East St Kilda, said that between the 24th of June and the first week of July, he supplied Montague with groceries worth £1, 8 shillings and 5 pence. On the 3rd of July, Montague gave him a cheque for £3 and 10 shillings and received the change. The cheque was dishonoured. Franklin Smiley, a butcher at Inkerman Street, St Kilda, said he supplied meat worth £1 4 shillings to Montague, who on the 30th of June gave him a cheque for £5 10 shillings. It was returned marked no account. Harold Taylor, jeweller of Carlisle Street, Balaclava, said Montague purchased a wedding ring, a vase, a necklet and earrings, valued at £2 10 shillings, and paid for them with a valueless cheque for £5 5 shillings. Details of the banking transactions conducted with the Bank of Australia Limited in Russell Street by Montague under the name of Oscar Marsham were given by George Norman Ferguson, an accountant. Montague, he said, opened an account on the 3rd of July with £5 in cash. On the following morning, he withdrew this money and paid in a cheque for £48, 17 shillings and 6 pence on the Commercial Bank at Chatswood, New South Wales. It was of no value. When cheques totalling £160 were received against the account, it was closed. Detective Gwyther said that when questioned on the 5th of September, Montague said his name was Cunningham. Later, he admitted his identity and guilt. Rubber stamps relating to the bank activities were found in his room. Montague was sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment on each charge, the sentences being cumulative. He did put in an appeal and was given bail. However, he was also charged on a further 3 counts of false representation 4 days later. On the 16th of September 1931 in the Melbourne Argus. Valueless cheques passed, man imprisoned for 18 months. John Montague of a Wrong Road, East St Kilda, was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment in the City Court on Tuesday for passing valueless cheques. Evidence was given that he obtained £2, 15 shillings and 2 pence from William David Cooley, a tailor, in Flinders Street on the 30th of June, 16 shillings and 6 pence from Edward Leo Curtis, proprietor of Bags and Company in Swanston Street on the 26th of June, and £3 from Gladys Bukolich, manageress of GWP Creed in Collins Street on the 19th of June. Detective William Edward Davis said that with Detective Gwyther, he arrested Montague at a house in East St Kilda. In his room, he found a chequebook drawn on various banks in Melbourne and suburbs and Sydney and Brisbane, a large number of bank stamps and an embossing machine, and also a list of managers of various banks in New South Wales. Montague admitted to the offences but pled for a light sentence as he had a wife to support and had already been sentenced to 12 months imprisonment at St Kilda recently for similar offences. In the court, he was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment on each charge. The accused asked if it was going to be concurrent, and Mr. Bond, the magistrate, said no. He was released on the 14th of December 1933. He married Selina Charlesworth under the name of Graeme Monte Winston Chisholm in February 1935 in Sydney. Selina was born in England and was 7 years older than Jack. She left for England around April 1935 and returned to Australia around September 1935. Selina retained the name Chisholm for the rest of her life. On the 12th of March 1936 in the Sydney Sun, Ernest James Montague was up for a bigamy charge. Ernest James Montague, 46, a broker, was committed for trial at the Central Police Court today on a charge of bigamy. It's alleged that on the 4th of November 1922 he married Doris Gwendolyn Berry, and on February the 13th, 1935 he went through a form of marriage with Selina Charlesworth, known as Selina Chisholm. Bail was fixed at £100. When formally charged, Montague said that when he married Miss Charlesworth he thought he was free to do so. Detective Leary gave evidence that concerning his marriage to Doris Berry, Montague said, "I'll put her on a hot seat. Doris was a little fool. She knew when I married her that I was already married." Leary said Montague told him that his first wife, whom he married in 1920, divorced him in 1924. He swore that by the time he married Selina Charlesworth, Zilla Gelch had divorced him and the Crown had no case against him. Doris Gwendolyn Montague said she lived with her 2 children at Roslyn Gardens in Darlinghurst. On the 4th of November 1922, she went through a form of marriage with Montague at St Philip's and lived with him for 5 months before he went to jail. She admitted that she and Montague had first lived together as man and wife, as she wanted to force her mother to consent to the marriage. Selina Chisholm of Stratford Hall, Darling Point, said she went through a form of marriage with Montague at Vaucluse. She lived with him for 6 weeks and then went to England. She was away for 6 months, and on her return he told her he'd fallen in love with somebody else while she was away. She then left him. In the Sydney Truth 3 days later, it outlines this case in a lot more detail. 2 well-dressed women were in the Central Police Court last week, placing evidence for a bigamy charge. At the conclusion of the hearing, Ernest Montague admitted that he used another name, Graeme Monte Winston Chisholm, and he was committed for trial. Detective Leary said that he admitted that he was known as Graeme Monte Winston Chisholm, but he denied the name Montague. But later at the detective office, he read a warrant to Montague and showed him a marriage certificate bearing the signatures E.J. Montague, which Montague admitted were his handwriting. Asked if he married at Sydney on the 4th of November 1922 to Doris Berry, Montague answered yes, but there is a catch in that. When Montague was shown a second marriage certificate bearing the signature of G.M.W. Chisholm, he admitted that that was in his handwriting. When Montague was asked to elucidate his alleged remark about there being a catch in it, the broker said, "She knew when I married her that I was already married." Leary said, "Can you produce the woman you allege to have married prior to your marriage to Doris Berry?" And Montague said, "You leave that to me." Subsequently, maintained the detective, Montague told him that the woman he had married in 1920 had divorced him in 1924. Mrs. Doris Gwendolyn Montague, a dark brunette, lived with her husband for 5 months until he'd gone to jail for a month. They then again lived together for 4 or 5 years in New South Wales and other states, there being 2 children of the marriage. In 1927, she declared her husband left her when he was given 2 years imprisonment at Tuncurry. He returned to her after the sentence and they lived together in New South Wales for about a year, and then he went to Melbourne alone. There had been no divorce or annulment of the marriage alleged. She was asked, "You knew you married this man, that he was already married, Mrs. Montague?" And she said, "No." "Where were you working?" "I was not working then, I was a student at the university." She asked to be introduced to him at a dance at Manly. He went away to New Zealand soon after, but she denied that she went to live with him at the Wentworth Hotel immediately on his return. "Did you sign the register about November?" "A couple of days before we were married, yes." "In what name?" "Montague." "Did you occupy a room with him before you were married?" "Yes." "And your sister called?" "Yes." "Did your sister tell you your mother wanted to see your marriage lines?" "No." "My mother never wanted me to marry him," exclaimed Mrs. Montague in answer to another question by Mr. Kincaid. "Did you say to him, 'If you have got any regard for me, you will marry me'?" "No, the suggestion came from him." "Did he say, 'You know I can't marry you'?" "No." "And you know I was married before I left for New Zealand?" "No." "Did he say, 'The only thing we can do is shift from here'?" "No."
He was shifted because he couldn't pay his bill. You lived with him for 2 days as man and wife before the marriage? Yes. Your mother tried to stop you marrying him? Yes. If what you say is true, why were you not married before you lived with him? When I met him from New Zealand, we were going to be married then. My mother came to the boat to prevent it. She stayed with me all the time I was with him and then took me back to Perth. Were you prepared to marry him that day? Yes. Was there any arrangement made with any minister? No. So you went to live with him to force your mother's consent? Yes, otherwise she wouldn't have given her consent. You went through a form of marriage? Yes. And you gave the age of 22? Yes. What age were you? 18. At this stage, Mrs. Montague was warned by Mr. Stevenson that she need not answer any questions which might tend to incriminate her. The witness intimated that she understood, adding, "There has been trouble already." Doris Montague added in her statement in court that after 1930 she refused to live any longer with Montague and left him. Dressed all in white and apparently older than the previous witness, Selina Chisholm of Stratford Hall, Yarrangaby Road, Darling Point, told the magistrate that she knew Montague as Chisholm. In February 1935 he had given her to understand that he was a single man. He also swore on oath at the registrar's office that he was a single man, she affirmed. On the 13th of February 1935, I was married to him at St Michael's Church of England, Vaucluse. She lived with Montague for 6 weeks, then went to England and remained there for 6 months. On my return, he told me he'd fallen in love with someone else while I was away. He told me he'd been unfaithful to me. He obtained money from me and I left him. The police prosecutor asked how much money, but Mr. Kincaid objected and the question was disallowed. Montague denied that in 1931 in Melbourne he married another woman, Helen Appleby, who his counsel said was the wife of a well-known Melbourne businessman, and as mentioned, that was absolutely correct. In reply to his counsel, Montague admitted that he'd been in jail on more than one occasion. Montague, who was stated to have had a number of previous convictions, mostly for false pretences, and who was described by the police as a plausible rogue. Ernest Montague said, "I simply say, Your Worship, that when I married Miss Charlesworth, I fully understood and thought that I was free to do so." Bail was allowed at £100. And on the 3rd of June 1936 in the Sydney Sun, convicted at the Court of Sessions today of bigamy, Ernest James Montague, 46, was sentenced by Judge Thompson to 4 years penal servitude. The judge remarked that the case was a serious one and it was hard to realise that anyone could have behaved with such callousness as the prisoner. The judge also added, "I fully believe Doris Berry's story of the 1922 marriage." So as a result, in September 1936, a divorce was issued to Selina Charlesworth. And then in March 1938, in the Sydney Labour Daily, Doris received a decree nisi from her marriage with Ernest James Montague. Doris remarried in 1939 to William Burkhart and she died in New South Wales in 1980. Ernest pops up again on the 21st of October 1940 in the Newcastle Sun. Jailed for fraud. "You are making a regular habit of this and the public has to be protected. If you don't drop it, you will be made an habitual criminal," said Mr. Soane to Ernest James Montague, 51 agent, who pled guilty to the following charges. Having obtained from Arthur Thomas Dodds clothes valued at £4 and £8 8 shillings and 3 pence in money by means of a valueless cheque on the 1st of January. Having obtained from Raymond Morks 2 pairs of shoes and a pair of riding boots and £8 15 shillings and 8 pence of money by means of a valueless cheque on the 5th of January, and having obtained from William Norman Coote a wedding ring, a clock and £7 and 17 shillings in money by means of a valueless cheque on the 1st of January. He was sentenced to 7 months hard labour on each charge, the sentences to be concurrent with the one that he's now serving. Detective Evans said that Montague admitted to him that he had cashed the cheques. At the time he thought there was money in the bank to meet the cheques. He was quite frank about the whole matter. There was a clue on his gravestone where it stated that he was the husband of Pauline. Upon further investigation, I found a Graeme Winston Chisholm who married Mary Pauline Lee in Wagga Wagga in 1953. Mary had been born in Wagga in 1908, so was 8 years younger than Ernest. Ernest is listed in the 1954 and 1958 census in New South Wales under the name of Graeme Winston Chisholm, and at this time he is at the property Brindangabba at Burke, and is employed as a bookkeeper. Mary is not listed on this census. In the 1963 census, they were living in Dover Heights, New South Wales. Graeme was a taxi proprietor and Mary Pauline was a physiotherapist. And Ernest died under the name of Graeme Winston Chisholm, and in brackets, on the 23rd of May 1968 in Dover Heights. On his death certificate it stated that his parents were William and Kathleen. Mary Pauline Chisholm died on the 11th of December 1978 at Rose Bay. Selina Chisholm, also known as Selina Charlesworth, died in Mossman but had been previously living in Manly on the 16th of April 1970. Despite my best efforts, I'm unable to find who the two children are of Doris Berry and Ernest Montague. Family trees do have a Josephine Gwen Montague, whose married name was Napier. However, I can't completely verify that, as it seems that when these children were born were after the 100-year restrictions with births, deaths and marriages.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.